Students from all over the world, all over Florida, have trusted TSRE to pass their Florida real estate exams. And what we're going to be sharing today is part of the reason why. We're going to be studying together. So if you're here to prepare for your Florida real estate exam, this is the right place. This simulator we're going to be using today is part of our PassFirstTry exam prep bundle. And to just give you some brief information on this bundle, it not just includes the question simulator that we're going to be working out of today, which is a phenomenal tool for testing yourself. It also includes the two key components for information, which are the audio review and the exam cram videos. 5 hours of audio review, our most condensed review material, only 5 hours. That allows you to go through it in 12 times, the time it would take you to go through the class just once. And the exam cram videos, which if you go through all of them, it's about 14 hours. So you could go through that 3 times in the time it would take to complete the entire FREC course just once. And we do that because we take the information from the course, which is representative by this 500-page textbook that's used with our instructor-led courses here, and we compress it down into just the need-to-know information in this about 100-page workbook. So this is 20% of the information, and that's fairly representative of the amount of information that's necessary for passing your state exam. Now, this doesn't give full enough detail and explanation for clarity, for initially learning the information, as well as satisfying that Florida Real Estate Commission requirement. That's where this big, fat 500-page textbook comes in. But when it comes to studying and review, you don't need to memorize every detail. This has the key details. And again, this is just part of, this follows along with the exam cram videos, but there's also QR codes in here that you'll be able to scan to go directly to the audio review, to go directly to the question simulator for that unit. So these tools work together. You also have the secrets of the exam, which is really like the instruction manual for not just using these tools to study for your exam, but how to position yourself for not just studying this information, but passing the state exam. All kinds of tips and strategies that are included in there. But without further ado, let's head right over to the TSRE app. So at the Tampa School of Real Estate, we are an independent real estate school. We're the largest independent real estate school in the state of Florida, but we give you the best tools available despite our independent status. And this simulator is something that we built in-house, and this works right in our TSRE app. This is basically a giant Android device here. I'm more of an iPhone guy myself, so you can download the app on the Apple Store or any Google device. You could also just log in through the website, the old-fashioned way. But the app is really cool because it gives you the offline mode. So if you're taking a flight or you're anywhere where you don't have a strong internet connection, especially for the exam cram videos, because playing videos, that could result in buffering, and that gets in the way of your exam prep. You could also resume right where you left off in the question simulator, which is helpful, but we're going to start fresh today, so we get a random 100 question sampling. So let's get right into it. This is meant to be structured just like the state exam. Now, we're not going to have time today to go through all 100 questions that it's going to service up here, but we'll be able to talk through quite a few of them. And what I really want to share with you today is this is not just about memorizing the questions. These questions that are presented in the simulator are more of a way to test yourself, to see if you know what you think you know, if you understand the topic that's being tested, because if you have to guess or it doesn't make sense, maybe the explanation that's going to pop up is going to help, but at the same time, maybe you need to go back and review more details. Maybe not quite the full details of your course, but maybe the details that are in those exam cram videos, or maybe just listening to the audio review unit. When you do complete all 100 questions in the simulator on your own in your account, it's going to give you a report at the end, and that report will actually break down each individual unit to tell you where you scored the highest and which sections you missed the most amount of questions, which those are the sections I would then recommend you go back and listen to the audio review a few times. Go through the exam cram videos, work through the workbook along with those exam cram videos. And again, that's going to be far simpler and more streamlined than cracking open, again, that 500-page course textbook or digging into the online course materials for that full course, just because it has so much more detail. So let's start the quiz here and get right into it. First question, Very simple key term type of question. What describes involuntary alienation? What describes involuntary alienation? We've got A, a will, B, a deed, C, descent, and D, notarization of a deed. Now, one of our secrets and the secrets of the exam is not in the course, not your answer. And one of the things that is not in the course is notarization of the deed. We do talk about a deed. We do talk about notarization and what it is, but those things don't necessarily, they're not taught together in the course. And while they can go together, absolutely, that's not going to be your answer here. It also has nothing to do with this if you absolutely really start to understand this key term and what the answer is. But when you have to guess, anything that you could weed out as something that is not in the course, you might say, oh, I remember, deeds don't have to be notarized. Deeds don't have to be notarized. Contracts don't need to be notarized. Nothing in your FREC 1 pre-licensing course has to be notarized. So that is not required. Although recording in the public records, that's when you would typically have notarization done. But that's not important for your exam. And that's what the exam prep is all about, focusing on what's important for the exam, not necessarily the most correct understanding of this concept, because in the real world there's a lot of gray areas and there's a lot of conflicting ideas and viewpoints that could sometimes overlap. The exam is much more simple and straightforward than the real world. So we just got to get back to basics. And at this point, that's probably all we could eliminate based on that not in course, because will, deed, and descent are all topics from the course. The term alienation just means to transfer, which we probably could even figure out based on this will, deed, and descent. These are all methods of transferring property. But what's going to really specifically dial us in here is which of the following is involuntary. Voluntary, like to volunteer, means you are to choose. Like you would choose who gets your property in a will. If you were to sell your property, you're choosing who to sell to and give them a deed. And you might think that you were to choose your children, but you could choose to have children, I guess. And maybe if you're adopting, then I guess you do choose your children. But maybe regardless of how you came about having these children, it may be or may not be what you want the property to go to is to those children. And so what is involuntary is descent. And let's clear off all my chicken scratch here and go ahead and try that answer and see if the guy on YouTube is right. And he is. Involuntary, again, means you're not choosing to transfer. Or it's not by your choice. It's transfer, but not by your choice. So with descent, it'll go to your children, to your spouse, depending on homestead and other factors like that. But ultimately, descent is just going to whoever is like next of kin, basically. Whoever's supposed to get it, notwithstanding having some sort of will. Because if you had a will, that would be your exact specifications. And so since we didn't have a will, and it just goes to whoever is the next of kin, whoever is entitled to it according to the laws of descent, then that's why it's considered involuntary, whoever your heirs would be. And you can see that's where this explanation here really kind of helps you understand what's really going on in the question. What are they really testing you on? One of the things we also do in the question simulator is we try to very rarely use anything like this made-up concept of notarization of deed. Or if it is something that is made up, we're at least combining stuff from the course, so that way you're not remembering other made-up stuff, because you don't want to remember made-up stuff, and really you don't want to remember made-up answers either. So that is one of the flaws of using something like practice questions here, is because now we've introduced this concept of notarization of deed, which is, that's only required if you want to record it in the public records, and that's not important at all for your exam. So that's good to know, but that's going to mess you up on the exam. There's so much to know, you've got to eliminate. Elimination is the key, and that's why, again, we've made this exam cram workbook so simple, is because we've eliminated as much as we possibly could while still making enough sense to review for studying for your exam. Next question. Which of the following is an economic characteristic of real estate? So economic characteristic of real estate, we got immobility of real estate, the uniqueness of real estate, the durability of the land, and situs. So what we're looking for here, things that affect the economics, or what are a factor of the property that is an economic factor and not necessarily a property itself factor, a geographic factor, anything like the immobility, the uniqueness, the durability. I'm going to go with situs. And this is a 1% chapter that this is coming from. So the question simulator will still throw in the 1% chapters, but it's only going to show up in these 100 questions one time. And so that 1%, one of the key things in here is the idea that, or the definition really, that situs is people's preference for a certain area. And so, for example, people's preference to be near the water makes waterfront real estate more expensive, and that's because situs is an economic characteristic. The uniqueness, that doesn't always create value. The durability, that's pretty much universal. We pretty much assume land is equally durable unless like we're really worried about it because it's falling apart or falling into the bay, the Gulf, the ocean, something like that. But otherwise, we don't look at that. And real estate is always immobile. It's the nature of real estate. If it's mobile, it's a mobile home, not real estate. Hence, it's immobility. So what does, again, affect the economics, the money, the value of the property is people's preferences for the area. When people prefer to live in that area, it increases the value due to the supply and the demand. You're getting a lot of extra explanation here on the air, which is, I think, why people have been tuning in for these practice questions here. So if you do like these questions, make sure you give us a thumbs up. Subscribe to us on YouTube, tsre.us/YouTube. If you're on Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn or wherever else we may be, hit the thumbs up or share. Share this with somebody who is also studying for their Florida real estate exam, and hopefully this helps them in passing their exam as well. But anyways, let's get into the next question. All of the following contracts are covered under the statute of frauds except. So this question could be rephrased. This is another secret of the exam, that we talk about rephrasing the question in a way that just simply makes more sense. Something that would be more conversational, something that is more like what you would say naturally as opposed to the test questionees that they write this in. All the following are except. That could just be reworded. I like to reword it personally as which of the following are not covered under the statute of frauds. That personally makes a lot more sense to me. In my brain, it clicks more. So that, and we haven't read any of the answers yet, because if the question doesn't make sense to you, don't read the answers yet. Even if it's a shorter question like this, try to make sense of it, like we're going to do right now with the statute of frauds. Hopefully this is something that you remember from the contract chapter. The contract chapter is a 12% chapter, so out of these 100 practice questions, you'll end up having 12 different contract questions in a question simulator practice exam, just like you would on the state exam. And statute of frauds is very likely to come up, I would say, almost every time you take an exam, just because it's a very likely question. There's certain topics that are much more likely than others, and they're topics that the Florida Real Estate Commission is more concerned about. Another hot topic I could share with you from the pre-licensing course is regarding escrow money. That is a huge one when it comes to showing up on your exam. But statute of frauds, definitely an important one in the contract chapter, and it says which contracts have to be in writing, which if we go down the list here and take a look at this here, we've got a few, and we're looking for which one does not have to be in writing. So the first one we have is a 6-month listing agreement. If there's something wrong with that, if you know what it is, put it in the comments, because there's something about this that isn't quite right, maybe. Maybe not. I'll put it in the comments if you know what it is, of what's wrong with A. I'm not going to say it's a typo, because it's not. But it could make the difference of a right and wrong answer. If you know, you know, put it in the comments. Mortgages, do they have to be in writing? Probably. You know, if we're talking about guessing, if we're talking about we're not sure, that sounds like something that has to be in writing. And so do option contracts. And now we also have another thing that is based on a period of time. And this is a lease agreement for longer than 1 year. And that's really the key differentiator. as it relates to whether or not the statute of frauds applies is this right here. So statute of frauds would apply to a lease that is longer than a year, but it wouldn't for a lease that's only 6 months. Nor would it apply to a 6-month listing agreement. That would not have to be in writing. It should be. As a business person, you want to have that in writing, but this exam is not a question of what you should do, what's the smart business move, what's the best for your business. It's a question of what is legal. And so what ultimately comes down to what is legal here, a 6-month listing agreement does not have to be in writing. It should be in writing, but it only is required by law to be in writing to be enforceable if it is longer than 1 year. So that's the statute of frauds. It applies to most real estate contracts, mortgages, option contracts, sale and purchase contracts, with very little exception. So most of the time, as it relates to contracts involving real estate, they have to be in writing. But leases and listing agreements specifically, they only have to be in writing if they're longer than 1 year. And that one definitely is a good one to know for your exam. Next question we've got. A seller you have a property listed with has requested that you advise all prospective purchasers that they're willing to negotiate price. Which of the following is true? A lot of information, so let's read it again before we even peek at the answers. A seller you have a property listed with has requested that you advise all prospective purchasers they are willing to negotiate price. The seller advised you that to tell purchasers they're willing to negotiate price, which is true. So we're doing a true-false, and whether or not you're sure about it, because these can get tricky, this is where you want to use your scratch paper, and you'd put down question number 3 on your scratch paper, and you'd put down A, B, C, and D, and you're doing process elimination where you're going to put a T or an F, a true or a false, because we want to look at all of these because one might be more true than the other. Now, usually that's not the case for the true or false questions, but your mind might be playing tricks on you. You might be seeing something and not pay attention to a small detail. So that's why you should look at every single one of these, especially in these which of the following are true, all the following except. Most of the time, especially these longer answer choices, there could be a lot going on because there's a lot of words for each answer as opposed to just the 1 or 2 word type of answers in this one. So first one, option A. Due to the duty of obedience, you must comply with the seller's request. So I'm just going to leave that one blank right now because I'm still trying to wrap my head around what we're talking about here as it relates to duty of obedience, because that should only come up when we're talking about single agency, and there's not really any single agency mentioned here. Another secret of the exam is don't add to the question. So obedience is an important topic as it relates to single agency. Let's just reread the question again, make sure I didn't miss it, because I'm looking at a camera here and maybe that's combobulating my brain just like the exam might discombobulate your brain. A seller you have a property listed with has requested that you revise all prospective purchasers that they're willing to negotiate price. Nothing about single agency. So what are we talking about? Obedience. I'm like, we'll put a shaky F for that one there, but I'm pretty sure it's a false. But just because we got to see if there's a better answer here, because we are looking for what is ultimately 100% unarguably true. That's what we ultimately want to get to. So next one, let's look at B. Unless you have this request in writing, you may not advise any prospective purchasers of that information. Well, that's sounding good. That's sounding good. Maybe that's a true. I'm going to leave it blank because we're only looking for one true, and I don't want to mark that one true and have to turn it into a false, but that sounded really good. Let's see if C sounds better. Due to Florida law, you may not disclose this information even if you have the request in writing. So, that one, I'm going to put a pretty strong F on that one. Not even shaky. Because if there's one thing you should remember from the course, it's the different laws and rules that were taught. Especially the more you start to study, you're going to see the laws and rules come up more. And when you're having to guess, it means you're not sure. So if you're struggling, if you're reaching, trying to find a memory of a law that says you can't have something in writing, that could be where you more strongly say, you know what, that is not it. So option D, you may disclose this information to prospective purchasers at your discretion. And a lot of times on the exam, you could usually get down to 2 answer choices, which this one's a really good example of I would say medium to more difficult question. I would probably put this up as one of the more difficult questions on the exam just because it's not answer question, pick an answer. It's 4 different options that you really have to deliberate and figure out here because this is getting into a finer detail in the course. So let's review B and D a little bit more, our 50-50 that we've gotten down to here. And even if you guess at this point, if you were to just pick a random option, which you should on the exam, if anything else, maybe go back to this one later. You could always click the skip button and come back to it. So it's not going to work because I'm in writing mode right now, and on your actual exam, it'll be, I don't think it'll be called skip, and I think it'll say next or something. It'll be a different interface. This interface doesn't match the state exam exactly with how it looks, but how it's structured, how it's timed, how the questions are picked, how the questions are set up is often a very good example of what the state exam is. Now, these are not going to be exact duplicates of the questions, but the style that they're in, this is a great example because these true-false questions, these are questions that may take longer than even doing math questions. Some of the math questions you could solve faster than some of the few questions you'll have on your exam that'll be a little bit more detailed where you'll have to dig through, and sometimes it might just be because you're a little shaky on whatever the topic is, just because there's a lot of different things to remember. No matter how much you've studied and reviewed, I would challenge any instructor out there to go out there and try to get exactly 100% on this exam. Just because when you're in the moment, when the stress is on, when you're taking the exam, even when you know this information inside and out, you can second guess yourself. So whenever you're sure, try to always relate back to what you remember the most from the course. So we've got option B. Unless you have this request in writing, you may not advise any prospective purchasers of this information. And then option D, you may disclose this information to prospective purchasers at your discretion. So the reason why I'm going to lean towards B, which I said it's a shaky true. I didn't want to put down the true because I wanted to be sure once we looked at these other ones, but having looked at D, I really don't like D. There's another strategy we call the desperation strategy when you have nothing else to go off of. So if you were just down to these two 50-50 options here, B and D, the desperation strategy says only use it if you're desperate and you've got nothing else, but if you have nothing else, the longer answer is usually more correct. And the longer part of this is specifying that this must be in writing. So that's really what this comes down to. And there's a lot of things you got to remember from the course. We just talked about the statute of frauds. This is coming from the same chapter here, a much finer detail than just the statute of frauds in general. But normally, the prospective purchaser, we're not allowed to tell them, at least in a transaction broker relationship, definitely in a single agency relationship. Now, this did not specify a relationship, so we'll go with what Florida law says when a relationship is not specified, and that is that transaction broker is the assumed relationship here in Florida. And in that assumed relationship, you do have limited confidentiality, which does include the price or even the willingness to negotiate the price. That is protected. So normally you couldn't say anything. So it is not at your discretion as they're laying that out there. That's really the key thing that makes me not like option D. And I didn't look at these beforehand, so I'm just using my general instructor knowledge, and hopefully it's right here. And it is, because that does have to be in writing. Because for the seller to waive that, and just generally, because if I were to put on my broker hat, and this is why even as a real estate broker, and you might say, well, John, you're a broker, shouldn't you know this? Because here's what I'm going to tell you, if I was your broker, get it in writing anyways. That's not important for the exam, though. It's a real simple policy for the real world. Get everything in writing. Get it in writing anyways. Get it in an email. Get it in a text message. That's the best business advice for the real world if I were talking to you as a broker. But when I'm talking to you as a Florida Real Estate Commission instructor who's trying to help you pass this, we'll use the word arbitrary law exam. And it's not really that arbitrary because these are laws that do govern your profession and they want to make sure that you know them. But that's the nitty gritty of this right here is, does it have to be in writing? And this is one of those situations where the law says in order for them to waive this, it does have to be in writing. So That's a tricky one, but those are what the true-false ones can definitely be, because you really have to piece it apart answer choice by answer choice to make sure that you're picking the best out of the answers that you have here. You could miss up to 25 questions on your state exam. This is multiple choice. And again, you should always guess because you don't get penalized for a wrong answer. But if you do miss more than 30 of these multiple choice questions, more than 25 on your state exam, only 30, you can miss up to 30 for your course exam, but the state exam you can only miss 25, which is a large margin of error. But a lot of these questions here are set up maybe to appeal to your common sense. They could maybe trick you in one way or another, of maybe thinking you remember something else from the course and not knowing what it is. That's your best defense going into this, is knowing the key concepts. Because the more you could know what these things represent, especially when they are legitimate things, like, so if we look at this question here, which law makes it illegal to deny credit on the basis of age? So every single one of these here are different acts that are covered in the course. There is nothing made up. There's nothing not in course on these answer choices. That might not be always the case on your state exam, but we'd like to make that the case here just because we want to minimize the amount of incorrect, wrong information that you're exposing yourself to, because you're already potentially going to make false associations here just with all these different options being up here as it relates to age-based discrimination. Because age-based discrimination is not covered by the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which is also known as the Fair Housing Act. That is an exam strategy you could use right there, because both A and C cannot simultaneously be correct. So if you simply remember that the Civil Rights Act of 1968 is the Fair Housing Act, you could say, well, that's both A and C. So if A is right, that means C is also right. And there's none on the exam where both two answers would be correct. So if you're thinking it is A, but you also see that C is on there, no, it's not an error on the exam. It means that your thinking is wrong. Your understanding is wrong, because age is not protected by the Fair Housing Act. We also have the Consumer Credit Protection Act, along with the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So credit is protected for age-based discrimination, but what type of credit protection act applies here? Or I should say Credit Act applies, because it's not the Protection Act. The Credit Protection Act, Consumer Credit Protection Act, this is to protect consumers, to help you be informed of the credit you're taking out. That doesn't have to deal with obtaining the credit, but what does have to do with obtaining the credit is the Opportunity Act. So the Opportunity Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, that deals with obtaining credit, which is what protects against age-based discrimination. So age-based discrimination is not always protected, but it is protected for the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. And what I would say is ultimately more important, even though the question wasn't directly about this, is for the one that was on here twice, the Civil Rights Act of 1968, also known as the Fair Housing Act, because that's where you want to know the acronym. And this is another Tampa School of Real Estate secret. You heard it here first, and if you heard it somewhere else, you know where they got it from. Familial status, race, sex, handicap, color, religion, and national origin. Also known as fresh corn, FRSHCRN, fresh corn. Fresh corn, no vowels. FRSHCRN. It's a little bit of a corny acronym. Get it? We're talking about fresh corn. But that one, if they're asking about protected classes, is one that you should know. Because even here, even though they're not directly asking about the Fair Housing Act, if you know the Fair Housing Act, you'd be able to know that's not an answer choice, because you know age is not up there because no vowels. A would be age. Now, if they're handicapped, that is protected for the Fair Housing Act. But that's separate than age. You can be handicapped at any age. That's not necessarily tied to a certain age. Age in and of itself, though, not protected by the Fair Housing Act, but it is protected by the Equal Credit Opportunity Act. So next question, we'll do a few more today. If you're enjoying the review, make sure you give us a thumbs up, give us a comment. Let us know if there's any topics that you've been struggling with. This is Ask the Instructor, after all, so feel free to ask in addition to the questions that I'm asking you here to help study. And even if you're watching the recording of this, feel free to put that in the comments, because we do look at those, and we do want to make sure all of our questions can be answered in one way or another in some video in the future. So next question, Wilma deeded a beachfront condominium to her son, James, who suffers from a terminal illness. The deed specifies that the property is to convey to James's daughter, Sandy, upon his death, who holds the life estate. And so I'm going to take something directly out of the exam cram videos that we do here, and it's the way we draw out this whole concept of a life estate. So when you have a life estate, you have somebody, a grantor, that gives a property to somebody who has it for their lifetime. That would be who has the life estate. And then it goes to, it either reverts to the grantor, but in this case, it goes to a remainder man. And so looking at this situation we've got here, let's see if we can put names in for these people. So we've got Wilma deeded a beachfront condo to her son, James. So we've got Wilma, James, and to convey to James's daughter, Sandy, upon her death. So there's Sandy as the remainder man, a vested remainder man, since she is specifically named. The question, though, is asking who holds the life estate. And since we drew this out, it's very clear and easy that that is James, because the life estate is whose lifetime it is based upon. So James holds the life estate because it is based upon James's life. Which of the following brokerage relationships is not permissible for residential transactions in Florida? This is a good one, but also a nice and easy one. Definitely one you'll want to know. So which of the following is not allowed? We've got single agency, non-representation, transaction broker, and dual agency. And one thing I'll help you out with here as well, sometimes the terms are used interchangeably. Non-representation and no brokerage is one of those examples. Non-representation is a no brokerage relationship. So you could see it as either or. Both of them are on the FREC syllabus as the options of what can exist as a brokerage. And that's what those three are. Those three all are allowed in residential transactions. But what is not allowed in Florida specifically, which it throws off people from other states that are coming here quite a bit, is dual agency. Dual agency is prohibited in residential transactions in Florida. And we do have a question coming about the recording. So yes, this recording will be available. If you click the link in your email, it'll be right on that same page. You just have to go through the playlist to get to not only this recording, but we've got a bunch of videos of this same exact thing, if you like this, with all different questions, as well as math questions, as well as all kinds of different review information about the career fairs, starting a real estate career, and so much more. You can also find that all on our YouTube, tsre.us/YouTube. You could also find that on our Facebook. We post a ton of videos on Instagram and TikTok and LinkedIn and all over the place. So wherever you go on social media, go find TSRE and advance your real estate career. So let's do a few more questions before we call it a day for today's live study group here with these practice questions. Hopefully it's helping you advance your real estate career, to help you get licensed, and I hope you share it with somebody who it could benefit as well. Next question, which estimate of value must conform to the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, or the USPAP? So we have a broker's price opinion, a comparative market analysis, an automated valuation model, and an appraisal for an FHA loan. Again, all things from your course. But there is only one Because the USPAP, as I read it out here, now on your exam, they're much more likely to call it the Uniform Standards Professional Appraisal Practice, unless they were asking it like this, where they don't want to make it as easy on you as giving away right in there that it is only for appraisals. So a broker's price opinion, notice that the word appraisal does not exist there. A comparative market analysis is also not an appraisal. That's why they don't use the word appraisal in the term. And then also you have your Zillow's estimates or whatever website branded name value that they come up with. That is what's known as an automated valuation model. That is also not an appraisal. Only an appraisal is an appraisal, and not only does it have to follow USPAP, but it also must be done by an actual certified appraiser if it is for a federal-related transaction, which would mean involving an FHA loan. So the only one that has to follow the Uniform Standards Professional Appraisal Practice is the one on here that is an appraisal. All the others are not an appraisal. You could refer to them as valuations, as CMAs, as comps, comparative reports, market reports. There's a ton of different names for them. These are the more proper names, at least according to the Florida Real Estate Commission syllabus. But the term appraisal is very specific, very protected, not just here in Florida, but federally as well. How is a property tax proration shown on the closing statement when property taxes have not yet been paid? So there's a rule of thumb that we share as an easy way, and we talk about this in the exam cram videos when we cover the prorations, but pretty much any proration on your exam. I'll let you in on the secret here. This is another one that you usually have to watch in the exam cram videos to get this, or at least maybe your instructor was able to share something like this with you. But pretty much every exam proration you're going to have is going to be debit to the seller and credit to the buyer. Secret's out. You still got to do the math usually, and there can be questions that are not necessarily even about a proration that maybe still involve a debit or a credit. So ideally, it helps if you actually understand it. But if you don't understand it, if you could just simply remember debit to the seller, credit to the buyer, that's level one. If you can at least get level one, when you get a math question that is a proration question, you might be able to eliminate even half, sometimes even all three wrong answers just by knowing it has to be debit to the seller and credit to the buyer. And so any sort of proration, property taxes when they haven't been paid, that's debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. Prepaid rent, that's debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. Interest on an assumed mortgage, that's going to be debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. In the real world, you may encounter situations that are the opposite. If it's like HOA dues that are paid in advance or something like that, you could see it in reverse, but that's not going to be on your exam. On your exam, I would even bet money on it. Debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. Or at least until the Florida Real Estate Commission catches on to my video out here telling everybody the secret that it's going to be debit to the seller, credit to the buyer, because that's how it is in the real world. And so they're not going to give you fictitious scenarios. There is some stuff in here on this exam that doesn't come up in your day-to-day business, but they're not going to just make stuff up that doesn't align at all with how things are done in the real world, especially when it comes to math like a proration that is used. A property tax proration is going to be on every single property that has property taxes in the real world. And unless those taxes have been paid, which they cannot be paid until November, so you're already in a situation where 10 out of the 12 months of the year, it's guaranteed to be debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. And the only way it's not debit to the seller, credit to the buyer is if the seller who is selling this house already paid their taxes before the year is even over. Not necessarily before the deadline of April 1st of the following year. That's when the taxes become delinquent, is April 1st. That's another good exam one to know. But getting back to this question here with the property tax proration, that means money is going to be paid from the seller to the buyer for the seller's fair share of property taxes. So there's our answer. Enough talking about it. Debit to the seller, credit to the buyer. And I do have to click it and make sure it's selected. Make sure you have your answers selected on the exam. Don't leave any of them blank because, again, it's either you get a point or you don't get a point. So question number 9 for today. A landlord collects a security deposit and advance rents on the 10-unit apartment building that she rents. What must the landlord do? So, key detail we're talking about here, because we're talking about escrow account. Escrow is for security deposits and advance rent. but we're talking about a landlord-held escrow account, which is a far less important topic for your exam, but it is still covered in the exam cram videos, and it is still something that could be on your exam. Probably not more than one question, though. And here may be that one question or a similar version of it. So secure deposits and advance rent for a landlord. So we've got a couple different options here. What must they do? So we've got option one, hold the money in a non-interest bearing account. Sounds easy enough, but let's go ahead and move on and see what else we've got here. Hold the money in a separate interest-bearing account and pay the tenant 5% simple interest per year. You know what? There's something that rings a bell about that as well. Don't just pick the answer, though, because that might not be the answer, and I'm going to explain why in just a moment. That's why you want to read everything, because there is only going to be one right answer, and so far, both A and B are sounding really good. And you might be wondering, is this a wrong answer question? Why do we have two right answers? But hold on, pump the brakes, we'll get there. Option C, once we've read all of them, it'll make more sense. Give the tenant written notice, either in the lease agreement within 30 days of the receipt of security deposits and advance rent, name and address of the depository, or if a surety bond has been provided. A lot going on there. Let's circle back to that one. Let's look at D real quick, post a surety bond. If you're saying this seems really confusing because I remember almost all of this here, well, that's because this is all from the course. So a landlord can use a non-interest bearing account. Simplest option, easiest option, that works. They could also put it into an interest bearing account if they pay the tenant 5% simple interest per year or 75% of the accrued interest. They could also post a surety bond as long as they're paying the tenant 5% simple interest. So how can these all be correct? Well, it's because this is an option, this is an option, this is an option, this is required. Option C is a requirement. You can only really do either A, B, or D. You can't do A, B, and D. You can only choose one option. You're either going to put it into a non-interest-bearing account, an interest-bearing account, or post a surety bond, and then maybe you have to pay interest to the tenant depending on which option you use, but those are options. And the question, this is a very specific question almost, and a question of can you read carefully? A lot of these questions are set up with that, and it's where, again, one word makes it all click. Because what must you do? Well, you must give them notice. You have to give written notice of where and how that security deposit is being held. The other three are valid options, but the one thing on here that is an absolute requirement is option C. Because they must give written notice within 30 days of taking that security deposit and advance rent, basically saying where the money's located, the address, all the other stuff that was in that answer choice there. So here's going to be our last one for today. Again, if you've enjoyed the review, hit that thumbs up for us. Share this with a friend who could use the help preparing for the exam, and hopefully this does help them in passing. But let's get to this final question here. Robert Smith is the broker of Luxury Homes, LLC. He is ordering a sign for the door of his new office. Which of the following does not have to be placed on the sign? So, another important question. This is from the brokerage operations chapter. It's a 12% chapter. And what happens a lot of times is the 12% chapters, contracts, and brokerage activities, most of the time people usually get those down pretty well because that's where they begin studying, those largest chapters. But the other thing, too, is it's got a lot of information in those chapters. The good news is most of that information is important. But if you treat all the smaller chapters with that same level of importance and attention to detail that you do with the brokerage operations and contract chapter, you're going to waste time, for lack of a better term. Because you're going to be going through it with a fine-tooth comb that is not necessary, especially for those smaller, less important units. And you don't want to ignore them completely, but you want to focus just on the need to know. And that's, again, where this exam workbook, that was literally our goal, to compress this down, to put the least amount of information on paper, to give you the least amount of information to have to digest, to eliminate as much as possible here. And so this is a very popular question for the exam. It's right in the exam cram videos of the items that have to be on the sign. There's actually a lot of really great visuals because the way this has to be on the sign is in the order of Luxury Homes LLC. That would be the one thing that would make this correct here in the order is you'd put the name of the brokerage at the top, then the name of the broker, and then the words licensed real estate broker. Exactly like that. Again, the only change is you'd put this at the top and you'd get rid of the address. You could put the address, especially if you want to get deliveries at the address. That's a great thing to have on your door. You'd be surprised how often delivery drivers will struggle to find where to deliver an item if there's not an address or a number on your suite, on your building. But it makes sense, because how would they know where it is? Even if you've got the company name, the suite number helps out a lot. The address, it can go on there. It's beneficial. But remember, this exam is not about what you should do. It's not about what the best business practices are. It's not about what makes the most sense. It's about what is required by the law. And what the law specifically requires is the name of the brokerage, the name of the broker, and the words licensed real estate broker, but not the address. And remember, it's not about what is not required to be in there. You don't want to remember negatives. You don't remember wrong answers. You want to remember what is required, which is, again, what's in that explanation: brokerage name, broker's name, and the words licensed real estate broker. So I hope this review today has helped you prepare and review for the Florida real estate exam. If you do want to unlock the full question simulator to test yourself completely, you could do that at questionsimulator.com. There should even be a link to get into the demo there, where you could even try out additional practice questions in the simulator before you commit to it. But this is such a powerful tool because it really helps shine the light on where you need to review, where you need to focus. And it is a really great study tool if you could really kind of piece it apart and really make sense of everything like we've been doing here on the show. But rather than relying just on the question simulator, what I would encourage you to do is to get the entire Pass First Try bundle, because unless you're already scoring 100% right out of the gate in the question simulator, you're going to need that more condensed review of the information that you already learned. It's not because you didn't learn it well. I'm sure your instructor, even if they weren't a Tampa school instructor, I'm sure they got you through the curriculum and you learned the information. It's just learning is not the same as remembering. It could have made sense to you there in the moment, but it's going to require conscious effort on your part to retain that information, to be able to apply it in the exam questions like we did here today. And this application that we did today only works when you have the ammunition. And that ammunition is your understanding and remembering of those key points. That's where the audio review is a really great tool to drill that in, because again, the entire thing, the entire course is condensed down to just 5 hours. The exam cram videos, that condenses it down to 14 hours. It's a little bit more detailed, and it includes the visual element, and it's also more interactive. It's a question and answer type of environment where you could follow along like you're sitting in an actual review class. And then you have the secrets of the exam, which helps you glue all the pieces of it together, gives you great exam strategies and tips, and really helps put you in the right headspace for being able to pass this exam. So if you have any questions about any of this, you could always call us 24/7 at 813-333-2676. Again, that's 813-333-2676. You could register right now and get access immediately to these exam prep tools at PassFirstTry.com. That's PassFirstTry.com. Get set up on there, get enrolled. We even have options starting at just $47 per month. And if you only need to study for a month, then just cancel after the 1 month. Or switch your membership over to Real Estate Pro University once you pass your exam, and now you could start learning more advanced training as it relates to actually using your real estate license, building a business plan, marketing, using AI for your business, sales techniques, communication techniques, contracts, understanding those, helping your clients obtain financing, helping run your business, helping build a team, and so much more. Any questions about any of this, reach out to us, 813-333-2676. We want to help you launch your real estate career and take it to those dream heights that you have. We want you to become the next success story, whether that's a part-time referral gig for you, or you want to start a team, you want to start a brokerage, you want to be the next big thing. Whatever you have inside of you, bring it. Let's take it to your limit. 813-333-2676. That's all the time we've got for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I hope to see you on Friday for State of Real Estate. Are you studying for your Florida real estate exam? If you are, you need to check out our Pass First Try strategy. You're going to love this. It's 4 steps that we break down the process to study for your Florida real estate exam. So you're set up to pass your Florida real estate exam because that's what you're studying for, right? To pass your exam. It's 4 steps. Number 1, you learn the information. You've got to learn this to be able to pass the exam, but it doesn't stop at learning. Step 2, you've got to reinforce the basic, simple, key concepts. As you learn this information, keep reviewing the simple things. You don't need to know everything, but you got to review these basic key concepts. Step 3, you've got to test your knowledge. The exam's going to test your knowledge, so if you don't test your knowledge in advance, you won't find out if you know what you think you know until you take the exam. And then step 4 is be confident and prepared, because even if you know this material, you need to be confident that you know the material. Check out the full strategy at PassFirstTry.com. That's PassFirstTry.com.